What happens when one of music's most respected legends sits down for what should be a simple morning show interview, only to face disrespect that shocks everyone watching? It only took 43 seconds of Al Roker's condescending attitude to turn what began as a routine appearance into television chaos that left viewers stunned and asking how someone could treat an icon so poorly. This is the story of the morning that changed everything. The morning when Chaka Khan, the queen of funk herself, walked onto the Today Show set expecting the same professional courtesy any guest deserves. Instead, she found herself face to face with a host who seemed determined to diminish her accomplishments and question her relevance. The tension was there from the very beginning. As Chaka settled into the interview chair, her elegant presence commanding the studio, Al Roker shuffled through his notes with visible impatience. The cameras were rolling. Millions of viewers were tuning in for their morning news, and nobody could have predicted what was about to unfold. "So Chaka," Al began, not even bothering to look up from his cards, "I have to ask, and I think our viewers are wondering this too, when was the last time you had a real hit? I mean, something people actually remember?" The question hung in the air like a slap. Chaka's eyebrows raised slightly, but her voice remained steady and professional. "Well, Al, I think my fans would disagree with that assessment. My recent work has been very well received, and I'm grateful for the continued support." But Al wasn't finished. He leaned back in his chair with a smirk that suggested he thought he was being clever. "Come on now, be honest with our audience. Aren't you basically just living off your old songs at this point? I mean, Through the Fire was what, decades ago?" The camera caught the exact moment. Something shifted in Chaka's expression. Her professional smile faltered for just a second, revealing the hurt underneath, but she composed herself quickly, her years of experience in the industry serving her well. "Al, I think you might want to do your research before having guests on," she said, her tone still controlled but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "I've released several albums in recent years. I tour internationally, and my music continues to reach new generations of fans." The weatherman seemed oblivious to the growing tension, or perhaps he was feeding off it. "But let's be real here, Chaka. Most people watching right now probably couldn't name a single song you've done in the last 20 years. Isn't that kind of sad?" The studio fell silent except for the hum of cameras. Even the crew members visible in the background seemed to freeze, sensing that something was going very wrong. Chaka Khan, a woman who had faced down record executives, demanding producers, and industry politics for decades, sat perfectly still for a moment. "I find it interesting," she said, her voice dropping lower, "that you would invite me onto your show just to insult me. Is this how you treat all your guests, or am I special?" Al laughed, actually laughed, as if the entire situation was amusing to him. "Oh, come on, don't be so sensitive. I'm just asking the questions our viewers want answered. Nobody's insulting anybody here." "Nobody's insulting anybody?" Chaka repeated, her composure beginning to crack. "You just told millions of people that my career is basically over, and that my recent work doesn't matter. How exactly is that not an insult?" The host waved his hand dismissively, a gesture that would prove to be a critical mistake. "Look, I'm just being honest. This is morning television, not a therapy session. If you can't handle a few tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews." That was the moment. That dismissive wave, that condescending tone, that complete lack of respect for a woman who had spent decades earning her place in music history. Something in Chaka's eyes changed, and viewers across the country could feel the shift even through their television screens. "Tough questions?" she repeated, her voice rising slightly. "You call disrespecting a guest tough questions? You call dismissing someone's life work journalism?" Al seemed to realize that things were escalating beyond what he had planned, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. "I think you're overreacting here, Chaka. This is just how interviews work. If you want people to just blow sunshine at you, maybe stick to the smaller shows." The words hit like a physical blow. Smaller shows. As if the Today Show was somehow doing her a favor by having her on. As if she should be grateful for the opportunity to be disrespected on national television. Chaka stood up slowly, her movement deliberate and controlled despite the anger that was clearly building inside her. The camera operators scrambled to adjust their angles, sensing that they were about to capture something unprecedented. "Let me tell you something, Al," she said, her voice now carrying the full weight of her authority and experience. "I was making music and touching people's lives when you were still trying to figure out what a weather map was. I have sold millions of records, influenced countless artists, and earned the respect of my peers through decades of hard work and talent." Al tried to interrupt, but Chaka held up a hand that stopped him cold. "I'm not finished," she continued, her presence filling the entire studio. You invited me here as your guest, and instead of showing the basic courtesy that any professional should expect, you've chosen to attack my career and question my relevance. That says a lot more about you than it does about me." The tension in the studio was now palpable. Crew members were looking at each other nervously, unsure whether they should intervene or keep rolling. The other hosts on set had gone completely silent, their usual morning show banter replaced by an uncomfortable awareness that they were witnessing something that had gone far beyond the usual interview format. Al, perhaps realizing that he had pushed too far, tried to backtrack. "Now hold on, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. I wasn't attacking anyone. I was just..." "You were just what?" Chaka interrupted, her voice cutting through his excuse like a knife. "You were just trying to humiliate me on television? You were just showing your viewers how little you think of me and my work?" The host's face was reddening now, whether from embarrassment or anger, it was hard to tell. "I think you're being way too dramatic about this whole thing, Chaka. This is how interviews go. We ask questions. Guests answer them. It's not personal." But it was personal. Every question had been designed to diminish her. Every comment calculated to make her seem irrelevant and past her prime. And now, when called out on his behavior, Al was trying to gaslight her into thinking she was overreacting. "Not personal?" Chaka's voice was incredulous. "You questioned my relevance, dismissed my recent work, and suggested I should be grateful for scraps. How is that not personal?" The cameras continued rolling, capturing every word of an exchange that was rapidly spiraling beyond anyone's control. What had started as a routine morning show interview was becoming a masterclass in how not to treat a guest, and Al Roker seemed completely unaware of how badly he was coming across to viewers. The studio atmosphere had shifted completely. What moments before had been a typical morning show environment now felt charged with an energy that made everyone present acutely aware they were witnessing something extraordinary. Al Roker, perhaps sensing he was losing control of the situation, made the fatal mistake of trying to regain authority through even more condescending behavior. "Look, Chaka, I think we need to just calm down here," he said, using the patronizing tone that had gotten him into trouble in the first place. "You're getting all worked up over nothing. This is just television." Just television. Those three words would prove to be the final straw. Chaka Khan looked at him with an expression that combined disbelief, disappointment, and a growing fury that had been building since the interview began. "Just television?" she repeated slowly, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "This is my reputation you're playing with. This is my life's work you're dismissing as nothing." Al seemed oblivious to the gravity of what he had unleashed. Instead of apologizing or attempting to salvage the situation, he continued down his destructive path. "Come on, everyone knows that careers have ups and downs. I'm just pointing out that maybe yours has been more down than up lately." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Even the camera operators seemed stunned by the sheer audacity of the statement. Here was a man who read weather forecasts for a living, telling one of the most accomplished artists in music history that her career was essentially over. Chaka's response came with a precision that cut through the studio noise like a blade. "Al, let me explain something to you that you clearly don't understand. I have been in this business longer than you've been on television. I've won 10 Grammy Awards, sold over 70 million records worldwide, and influenced generations of artists who are still making music today." She paused, letting the weight of those achievements settle over the studio before continuing. "And you, a man whose greatest accomplishment is pointing at weather maps, have the audacity to sit there and tell me that my career is in decline?" The studio fell completely silent. Even the usual background noise of a television production seemed to stop as everyone processed what they had just heard. Al's face went through a series of expressions, from shock to anger to something approaching panic, as he realized how badly this was going. "Now wait just a minute," he stammered, his professional composure finally cracking. "There's no need to get personal about this. I was just doing my job." "Your job?" Chaka's voice rose with genuine incredulity. "Your job is to insult guests? Your job is to make people feel unwelcome and disrespected? Because if that's your job, Al, then you're doing it very well." The other hosts on the panel, who had been watching this unfold in stunned silence, finally began to realize they needed to intervene. But every time one of them started to speak, the intensity between Chaka and Al pulled all attention back to their confrontation. Al, perhaps realizing that his usual tactics weren't working, decided to escalate even further. "I think you need to understand that this show has standards, Chaka. We can't just let every guest come on here and expect us to pretend their career is something it's not. The statement was so outrageously disrespectful that for a moment, even Chaka seemed shocked into silence. The idea that she, Chaka Khan, somehow didn't meet the standards of a morning talk show was so absurd it seemed to defy response. But when she did respond, her voice carried an authority that filled every corner of the studio. "Standards?" she said, the word dripping with disdain. "You want to talk about standards? Let me tell you about standards, Al. Standards mean treating guests with respect. Standards mean doing your research before an interview. Standards mean conducting yourself with professionalism instead of trying to tear people down for entertainment." She stood up fully now, her presence commanding the entire space. "I have performed for presidents, royalty, and millions of fans around the world. I have collaborated with the greatest musicians of multiple generations. And you think I don't meet your standards?" Al, cornered and clearly out of his depth, made what would be his biggest mistake of the entire encounter. Instead of backing down, instead of apologizing, instead of showing even a shred of the professionalism he claimed to represent, he chose to attack. "Maybe those days are behind you, Chaka. Maybe it's time to accept that and move on to whatever comes next instead of living in the past." The words hit the studio like an explosion. Several crew members actually stepped back, as if physically recoiling from the impact of such a cruel statement. The other hosts looked horrified, finally understanding that this had moved far beyond anything that could be smoothed over with morning show pleasantries. Chaka Khan stood perfectly still for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but carried such force that every person in the studio hung on every word. "Living in the past," she said, each word measured and deliberate. "Al, my past includes achievements you could never dream of reaching. My past includes touching millions of lives with music that still moves people today. My past includes building a legacy that will outlast anything you will ever do in your entire career." She took a step closer to his desk, her presence growing even more commanding. "But you know what the real tragedy is here? This isn't about my past at all. This is about your present. This is about who you are right now, in this moment, showing the world exactly what kind of person you are." Al tried to interrupt, but Chaka's voice rose to override his attempt. "You are showing everyone watching that you are the kind of man who invites a guest onto a show just to humiliate them. You are showing them that you think success gives you the right to be cruel. You are showing them that you have no respect for the people who built the industry that gave you your career." The studio was completely silent now, except for Chaka's voice, which seemed to grow stronger with every word. "And worst of all, you are showing them that when confronted with your own behavior, instead of having the courage to admit you were wrong, you double down and become even crueler." Al's face had gone from red to almost purple, his embarrassment and anger warring with each other as he struggled to find a response that might salvage the situation. But there was no salvaging this. The damage was too complete, too public, too devastating. "I think," he said, his voice tight with barely contained rage, "that some people just can't handle honest criticism anymore. Everything has to be sugar-coated. Everyone has to be told they're wonderful all the time." It was the wrong thing to say. So completely, utterly wrong that several people in the studio actually gasped audibly. Chaka looked at him with something approaching pity. "Honest criticism?" she repeated. "Al, there is nothing honest about what you've done here today. This wasn't criticism. This was cruelty disguised as journalism. This was a sad little man trying to make himself feel important by tearing down someone whose accomplishments he could never match." She gathered her things with the dignity and grace that had defined her entire career. "And the saddest part of all is that you still don't understand what you've done. You still think this was about asking tough questions instead of what it really was, which was showing the world exactly who you are when you think you have power over someone." The confrontation had reached its peak, but somehow everyone in the studio knew it wasn't over yet. The energy in the room suggested that something even more dramatic was about to happen, something that would define this moment for everyone who witnessed it. The studio held its collective breath as Chaka Khan stood at the crossroads of this disastrous interview. Everyone present seemed to understand that they were about to witness something that would be talked about for years to come. Al Roker, still clinging to his misguided sense of superiority, made one final attempt to regain control of the narrative. "I think our viewers can see what happens when some people can't handle the real world," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is exactly the kind of diva behavior that explains why certain careers fade away. The words hit the studio like lightning. The casual cruelty of calling her a diva, the dismissive tone, the complete lack of self-awareness about his own behavior, it all combined into a moment so shocking that several crew members actually stepped forward, unsure whether they should intervene. But Chaka Khan didn't need anyone to fight her battles. She had been fighting them herself for decades, and she was about to demonstrate exactly why she had earned the title Queen of Funk. Diva behavior, she said, her voice now carrying a power that seemed to vibrate through the entire studio. Al, let me tell you what diva behavior actually looks like. Diva behavior is inviting someone onto your show and then spending the entire time trying to destroy them. Diva behavior is thinking that your position gives you the right to be cruel to people who have accomplished more in their careers than you ever will. She took another step toward his desk, and for the first time in the entire interview, Al actually looked intimidated. Diva behavior is sitting there with your smug little smile, thinking you're clever while you reveal to millions of people that you are nothing more than a bully with a microphone. The other hosts on the panel looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. The tension had become so thick, it was almost suffocating, and everyone could see that this was building towards something unprecedented. Al, his face now flushed with embarrassment and anger, made his final, fatal mistake. Well, maybe if you spent more time working on new music instead of complaining about how people treat you, you might actually be relevant again. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, their equipment still rolling but their bodies completely motionless as they processed what they had just heard. It was such a breathtakingly cruel thing to say, so completely unprofessional and personal, that it crossed every line of decent human behavior. When Chaka finally spoke, her voice was quiet but carried such intensity that it seemed to reach every corner of the building. Relevant? She repeated, and in that single word was contained all the hurt, anger, and disappointment that had been building throughout this entire encounter. Let me tell you about relevance, Al. Relevance is creating music that still moves people decades after it was recorded. Relevance is influencing artists who are topping the charts today. Relevance is being remembered for something more than reading weather reports and destroying guests on morning television. She moved even closer to his desk, her presence now completely dominating the studio. But you know what? You're right about one thing. I am going to be working on new music. I'm going to continue creating, continue performing, continue touching people's lives with my art. And do you know what you're going to be doing? Al sat silent, apparently realizing that anything he said at this point would only make things worse. You're going to be the man who thought he could tear down Chaka Khan on live television and learn that some people don't break as easily as you hoped they would. Her voice rose with each word, building to a crescendo that filled the entire studio. You're going to be the man who showed the world that when given the choice between showing respect and showing cruelty, you chose cruelty every single time. The camera caught every detail of what happened next. Chaka Khan, with the grace and dignity that had defined her entire career, began removing her microphone with deliberate, careful movements. Each action was performed with such precision that it became its own form of communication. "This interview is over," she said, her voice cutting through the studio silence like a sword. "I came here to talk about my music, my career, my life's work. Instead, I found a man so threatened by accomplished women that he can't conduct a simple interview without turning it into an attack." Al tried one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Now come on, Chaka, there's no need to be so dramatic about this. We're just having a conversation here." The response came like a thunderclap. "Dramatic?" Chaka's voice rose to fill every inch of the studio. "You want to see dramatic, Al? Dramatic would be if I stayed here and continued to let you disrespect me and my legacy for your viewers' entertainment. Dramatic would be if I pretended that what you've done here today is acceptable behavior from anyone, let alone a professional broadcaster." She finished removing her microphone and set it down on his desk with such controlled force that the sound echoed throughout the silent studio. "But I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to give you any more opportunities to show the world what kind of man you really are." The moment stretched on as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Chaka gathered her things with movements that somehow managed to be both angry and elegant at the same time. "I want everyone watching this to understand something," she said, addressing the cameras directly instead of Al. "This is not how professional interviews are conducted. This is not how guests should be treated. And this is definitely not how anyone should speak to another human being, regardless of who they are or what they've accomplished." She turned back to Al one final time, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades of experience, success, and hard-earned wisdom. You had the opportunity to interview one of the most accomplished artists of the last 50 years. You could have learned something. You could have shared something meaningful with your viewers. You could have shown respect for someone who has earned it 100 times over. The studio remained completely silent as she delivered what would be her final words to him. Instead, you chose to reveal exactly who you are. And now everyone watching knows it too. With that, Chaka Khan walked toward the studio exit, with her head held high, her dignity intact, and her reputation enhanced rather than damaged by what had just occurred. Behind her, she left a studio full of stunned crew members, embarrassed co-hosts, and one weatherman who had just learned that some people refuse to be diminished by bullies with microphones. The cameras continued rolling as she reached the studio door, capturing her final moment before she disappeared from view. She paused for just a second, turned back toward the cameras, and delivered one last line that would be quoted for years to come. Some people try to make themselves bigger by making others smaller, but real strength comes from building people up, not tearing them down. Remember that. And with those words, the Queen of Funk walked out of the studio, leaving behind one of the most shocking moments in morning television history, and proving once again that true class cannot be shaken by those who possess none at all. The studio remained in stunned silence long after she was gone, the weight of what had just happened settling over everyone present like a heavy blanket. Roker sat at his desk, his face a mixture of embarrassment and anger, finally beginning to understand that he had not emerged victorious from this encounter. The interview was over, but its impact would be felt for much longer than anyone in that studio could have imagined.